This is your host, Bhartiya, and we are here at Kubecon in Seattle. And today we have with us Brendan Burns, co-founder of Kubernetes and also a distinguished engineer at Microsoft.
Apparently so.
Good to see you again.
It's good to see you as well.
So first of all, this is the biggest Kubecon ever, if I'm not wrong. So So what has been your observation so far?
It's a lot of people. No, it's great to see. I mean, I think that over the years as it's grown, it's become more and more sort of user focused. I think that's good, right? It's more and more people who are either using it in practice or learning how to use it. I think we've done a good job, I hope, of maintaining a conference where it's educational for people, where they can learn, where they can go deep if they want to go deep. And like we had the contributor summit on the day before the conference started, where people who are sort of on GitHub every day messing around with the code can get together. At the same time, I think we've got a lot of, we're here at the expo area, we've got a lot of people who are starting to build their businesses, not even really starting, have built their businesses on top of Kubernetes in terms of monitoring and logging and all this kind of stuff, and that's pretty awesome to see as well. So
yeah, so there's a lot, healthy ecosystem of companies commercializing on top of.
Yeah, and it's not, but I think it's good because it's not just a bunch of companies commercializing, it's actually also a bunch of people using it. Mm-hmm. So like it's not just a bunch of vendors trying to be like, you should use this, but actually people who are coming to it, finding value, and then finding software vendors who will help them use it
the
better.
ratio of vendor versus user is is high. There are so many incredible.
It's well balanced, I think, here. So I think I think that's good it's good for the ecosystem. If it was all vendors, then I'd be worried, and if it was all users, then I mean that's a different kind of conference. It's good, but it's a different kind of conference.
So, but as the use cases of Kubernetes, to be honest with you, I don't know who's not using it. When I go
it's getting to be that way.
Yeah, so like everybody is using it. In windmills, I was in, when they got China, Goldwind, they're using it. So when these use cases are kind of growing, does it concern you also in a way, or it makes you happy?
I think both, right? I think that sometimes I worry that people, are adopting it sort of out of buzzword bingo and trying to contort it to their use case, and it might not be the perfect fit. I think that it was designed with a specific set of stuff in mind, and I think if you can take the core and make it work, that's fantastic. And I think some of the things we've done with the virtual kubelet and IoT actually shows that that's possible. But at the same time, I don't want people to be doing it just to sort of pad their resume, right? I want it to be really useful. And I do, there is a degree of worry that with lots of different requirements coming into the mix, it becomes hard to make decisions, right? And so I think sometimes you can lose focus if you have tons of different, really divergent use cases and every one of them ends up being important, right? And every vendor says, oh, that's my most important customer. I'll go after their use case or whatever. But it's something to be worried about, but so far, I don't think it's been a big problem.
Yeah, because we saw, I don't want to name the project, but we saw that when one of the major projects, they lost focus. Yeah. At the same time, if you look at the Linux kernel, they have all the use cases there, and they somehow accommodated.
Yeah.
One more challenge is that, as you said, a vendor, they have their users, so the risk is that they might do a lot of, kind of their own soft fork, but it gets so much deviated from the main, upstream Kubernetes that is for them to bring it back.
Yeah. Well, so I just came from the Conformance working group, and the whole purpose of that Conformance program is effectively to ensure that doesn't happen, and that if a user designs an app in a certain environment and it's conformant, and they take it to another environment and it's also passing the same conformance tests, that the app should work untouched, right, unchanged, and I think that's how we ensure that sort of thing works, and I think that's one of the things that the CNCF is doing for the project. One of the most important things, honestly, that it's doing for the project. So that's and it's an important discussion. Actually, interestingly, it's an important discussion that we're starting to have around conformance as we start to see more specialized use cases, right? So right now, conformance testing doesn't cover things like GPUs, because not every cluster is going to have a GPU, but that user who's using GPU for machine learning or whatever else, they're going to want to know the same thing. Like if I build my workload in on-prem, and is it going to work in Azure? That's an assurance that they need, and we need to figure out as a conformance group how you have these sort of profiles, right? Say I conform to the basic profile, but I also conform to the GPU profile, Windows as well, that there's going to be a Windows profile, how we structure the conformance test. So it's not confusing. So it's not like, the user's like 200 check marks for every provider and I have to understand what each one means. But at the same time, we open the door to, it can't be one size fits all, right? The workloads are different. Some use state, some don't really care about state. We want to make sure that the conformance test can reflect all the different sort of use cases that people are putting to Kubernetes. So I think that's how we prevent that sort of soft fork. And I think the more interesting question that is happening in the same sort of, it's not really a soft fork, but a discussion around sort of a long-term support version, right? Because we definitely get strong feedback from our customers, like, we want to standardize on something and we want to standardize on that thing for 2, 3, 4 years, right? And the project just doesn't move at that speed, right? It's way faster than that. And it's, the policy right now is they'll backport patches 3 releases. That's it, right? And for a lot of enterprise, that's like 9 to 12 months. For a lot of enterprises, that's way too short. So we have to also figure out how do we ensure that we don't have a bunch of sort of old versions out in the wild that are kind of little unsupported or patched in weird ways. I think we need to kind of come up with a strategy for a long-term support version too.
Yeah, I will go back to the example of Linux. I talked to Linus also recently, and the thing is, sometimes you would see on the airplane, the crashes, and you see the Linux kernel. But he was that I was not worried about it was a Linux kernel that crashed. I was worried about they were running an unsupported version of Linux. Right. So similarly, when there are 2 approaches. A lot of people, they're like, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And second is, just move faster. So when you do embrace the LTS model, you also kind of run a risk of where people are like, it's just old stable model that just sit there, but then they also are not there to keep it updated. Yeah, no, it's true. And the other alternative, I think, is to move to sort of the way that client software is now, where it's sort of constantly updating itself, where you don't really even know what version you're running, right? And it's just sort of in the background, it's constantly updating yourself. That's not where we are as a project right now. We could try and get there. I think it would be an enormous amount of work. It's sort of ironic, actually, like that Kubernetes is this technology to help people be more agile and to do weekly releases or daily releases. And like the project itself is very waterfall-y, right? It's very much like we're going to do a release planning and we're going to have a code freeze and we're going to do our, it takes 4 months to do a release and this is the themes and all this kind of stuff. It would be a tremendous amount of work to move to a more continuous delivery model. I think where we're at right now is an awkward middle ground where we release quickly, but not continuously. So we release too quickly for the people who want LTS, and we don't release continuously enough for people to just kind of ignore version. And I think the cloud providers have a role to play there, right? As we start pushing auto upgrade, and the cloud provider can start saying, hey, you can forget about the version. Hey, we're going to do the consistency testing, and that sort of thing. So I think that's part of our job, actually, as the cloud provider, is to soften that blow for the customer, take care of security patching and all of that kind of stuff. So. Especially the recent vulnerability that came out.
That was one where
I was like, if you look at OpenStack, a lot of 70% of the users are running, unsupported versions. Yeah. So there is a big risk here, especially when the use cases are growing.
Yeah. And that security example is also a great example of why an LTS is kind of needed.
Yeah.
It's like that patch was only backported 3 versions. If you're on 1.7, the community sort of was like, well, upgrade.
Yeah. And then you also get enough time, you can plan ahead, you have enough years. So what kind of, so out of these 2 models, which one do you think is more, longer?
Well, I think the continuous model, if you can get there, if we could get there,
that should be ideal model.
Would be ideal, right? And actually, in the very early days of the project, I cut a release every week. Pre 1.0, every single week we cut a release because it's changing so fast, right? And you had to get people out there to test it. But we got consistent feedback. It's too fast. I can't keep up. You have to slow down. I need to stabilize and I need to stay. And because at the end of the day, most of these people, they're building apps on top.
Right, exactly. There are so
Right.
many moving parts already.
They're worried about making their app go and making their app stable, and they don't want the
They want
infrastructure.
everything else to become,
Right. And again, so I think that's where the cloud provider comes in and says, okay, I'll take responsibility. I'm going to keep changing it, but I'll take responsibility for changing that layer. You can focus on your app. We'll vet the upgrade process. We'll strategize about, one of the big upgrades that we've done and other people have done was the etcd2 to etcd3 migration there. There's a data migration there, and it's complicated, right? Those are the kinds of things that a cloud provider should do for you, right? And the reason why people buy a managed service, honestly. So that decoupling of roles, I think, helps us get there. I think it's gonna be a long time before we move to sort of a versionless model where it's just weekly releases and constantly upgraded.
Right.
Some of the work that people are doing around operators and operators for managing clusters, I think, will help us get there. But it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I think the two models makes more sense. One model which is like moving fast, so people can pick up, and you can also continue the innovation there. And then LTS model where people can just stabilize and use it whatever they want. And of course, mindset needs to change. And people need
and honestly, like when you look at it, when you look at the kernel, like that's the distinction between sort of the distribution versus the like. It's not like the kernel backports a lot. The distributions go and then say, oh, okay, we're going to backport that stability
You
patch.
can use the Linux tree or Grex tree, depends on what you want, right? You mentioned distribution, and you have talked about cloud providers a lot.
Right.
We have seen that with OpenStack also, where distribution, kind of becomes. So what is the, what's your take on, distributions of Kubernetes? Because they also have to keep up. Everybody claims, but there is latency.
Yeah. I mean, we take new releases, we're just lining up to do 1.12, 1.13 just dropped, right? So we're running, 3 months, 4 months behind where the project is, and I think it's pretty similar for all of the other distributions that are out there. Part of that again is the validation that we have to do, right? And we have to ensure that we understand how to operate it, we understand how to repair it. Honestly, that the release gets a little mileage on it, right? Every release I've seen, I mean, it's sort of like the wait till Service Pack 2 joke, but like, I feel like every release is fast followed by a patch release like a week later or a week and a half later as people start trying it out in production and you get exposed to all of the different stuff that people do and the bugs start coming in. So I think that's a big part of why there's a little bit of a lag there, is obviously we can't push that out to our customers.
Talking about bugs, bugs are part of software development. Whoever says there is, that's totally wrong. But after this, the vulnerability, what did you wake, you're worried about it, or what are you going to make? You can never ensure that there will be no bugs if you're writing software, but still, what are you doing to ensure that?
So I think the steering committee, Kubernetes steering committee takes this really seriously, takes the obligation really seriously. And one of the things we're doing in conjunction with the CNCF actually is doing a full, hiring someone to do a full security scan of the code, right? To walk through the code and look for problems. Again, I don't think it's gonna be perfect, right? I don't think they'll find everything, and there's no guarantee they even would have found this. But that's an important first step. I think we're also thinking architecturally, like this bug, although this was the worst of it, this class of bug, there's been 4 or 5 other in Kubernetes. This sort of bug in that proxy layer, it's come up maybe 5 times over the last 12 months. There's been bugs in that area. This one was the worst by far, but they've been there. And so we're also thinking architecturally, that's a good indication that component needs to be rethought and rewritten. Both to make patching it easier. So you talk about, how we patch, because it's all in one binary, you have to patch the entire binary. If we think about extracting some of this logic out, running it separately, then maybe the security upgrade is really just a security upgrade to that binary, not the whole application. And maybe it's just a container that runs, not the main API server, right? So there's some stuff that we can do. It doesn't necessarily reduce the bugs, but it makes the task of upgrading and fixing and patching easier. So maybe we could have more improvement there. But I also think we just need to I think as a steering committee, as a community, we need to start treating this a little bit more like it's a box software product at some level. Like we have an obligation. I think open source sometimes is like, yeah, it's open source. Like it's a collective responsibility.
Right.
But I think what we have to say, given the kind of penetration that you're seeing, given that as you say, so many people are using it, I think we have to accept that we have a responsibility to do some due diligence to make sure it's secure, right? And that we try and find these bugs. Unfortunately, with the Linux Foundation and the CNCF, we have the resources to go do that. So that's good. And the same thing's true like with Azure. One of the great things about a company like Microsoft is we actually have offensive hacking teams, right? And so my product gets attacked, and I get that feedback back, and I can then iterate and make it better, right? So I think, and that feeds back into Kubernetes too, right? As people are saying, okay, here, and actually I do a lot of work to help them figure out, like, here's areas you could think about attacking. And we can get that feedback as well. So I think every cloud provider also sort of has an obligation to do that for their end users. And then because it's open source, we can then contribute it back into the community writ large.
Right. I mean, cloud providers have a lot of kind of influence over what is going in, but what happens is that there are two aspects of security. One is that, okay, you have fixed it, release the patch, but who is going to deploy them actually?
Sure.
Cloud providers, okay, of course they have, but so how do you ensure? This is the problem that we've seen with other projects also.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I hope that the move towards operators and things in the cluster that are actually responsible for doing the upgrades can help in those situations. I mean, I will tell people, and I told people in response to this one, this is why, you yell at me for my managed service when I won't let you flip a flag, or I won't let you, why don't you have 1.13 released yet? But this is where you get the win of the managed service, is every single person who was an AKS customer and woke up that morning to that CVE also woke up to a notification from Azure saying, we patched your cluster already. And we had patched, all of the distributors get embargoed disclosures ahead of time, right? And so we get to get the patches ready and even patch the clusters ahead of when it's announced to the world. And so that's just one of those things. That's one of the value propositions of a managed solution. I do think we should do more for everybody else, but at some level, that's the choice that they're making when they choose to run an unmanaged is they need to own that responsibility.
Right.
And
the good thing is, being an open source project, we have so many models to look at what mistakes they made, so it's very easy to kind of fix things.
No, and I think, and one of the other things we've been looking at a lot is the Node.js dependency attack that happened, right? And starting to say, like, what would that look like if somebody tried that against Kubernetes, and how would we defend against it, and do we think we're in the right place for that kind of stuff? And as it turns out, actually, one of the things we've discovered in looking at this is there's not a really good database of Golang package to CVE. Like for Node, actually, there's a great database of the stuff that NPM maintains. In the Go community, there isn't that, right? And so it actually, if I said, hey, we have all these dependencies, do any of them have open CVEs? It's actually somewhat challenging for us to go and answer that question. But it's another area where we are investing in, as we look at what has happened in other projects.
Right. So, what are the use cases that you are most interested in or excited about when it comes to Kubernetes?
Well, I mean, so one thing that I'm definitely really excited about is the work that we did with the virtual kubelet and the work that IoT did to make it so that you can use the Kubernetes deployment APIs to deploy containers to your edge device. And I think that I'm excited about that, both because there's this hardware geek inside of me who really likes edge and hardware devices and stuff like that, little robots running around and all that stuff. But also it was because it was unanticipated, right? Like they went off, we did a bunch of work, not related to IoT at all. They saw what we were doing and they adapted it. They took the source and adapted it to work to solve a problem that they had and accelerated. They could have built a deployment system. They could have said, hey, you know what, IoT is totally different. We need a different deployment system, and instead they thought, hey, there's already this deployment mechanism out there. How do we adapt it to our environment, right? And that kind of collaboration is exactly why you do open source. And it's even better when it's collaboration that you didn't see coming, right? And just sort of shows up whole cloth. And they're like, hey, we got this demo, and actually they were showing it at the booth earlier. Pushing these cognitive services containers that Azure Cognitive Services has built down to IoT edge device, doing optical character recognition, at the booth, powered by all this tech. So that was really awesome and exciting to see. It's the other piece that I'm having a lot of fun with, actually. It's not really technology related, but where Kubernetes is coming to the world of children's books again, with the second edition of the Children's Illustrated Guide to Kubernetes Volume 2, Fippy Goes to the Zoo. I love that stuff. Like that kind of creativity really helps onboard. One of the most important things to me anyway is onboarding new users, getting them up, getting them comfortable, getting them oriented to the work, and things like that are a great tool to do that as well. So that's something I'm pretty excited about.
It's TFiR OS. It's using Linux. It's also IoT. So are they using Kubernetes? Will it be consuming Kubernetes?
So the IoT devices right now are single node devices, but I think we are increasingly seeing a desire for people to do more sophisticated processing out at the edge. And in many cases, that is Kubernetes. And so whether it's people rolling their own homegrown Kubernetes clusters or thinking about running it in Azure Stack, that's definitely a use case that we're seeing more and more, especially oil pipelines or other places where the bandwidth is bad, where there's a lot of data they need to process, but they can't send it across the network to the cloud. They want to do local, MapReduce style processing and then send aggregate data back up. So that's an important area, and we work a lot with the Azure IoT folks to figure out, and the Azure Stack people as well, to figure out how we can enable people to use Kubernetes there as well as up in Azure proper. So it's definitely an area we're excited to pursue even more.
Excellent. Now, last question before we wrap it up. I have never asked you. It's that what do you do in your free time? What are your hobbies?
Children, mostly. I have two kids. I have a 6-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, and most of the non-work time is sort of hanging out with them. I coach their soccer team, all sorts. We do a lot of projects. We built these wooden staffs. They got all decorated. They're sort of still into make believe and running around the yard and stuff like that. So that's a lot of what I do. I actually just this last spring I bought a boat as well, a sailboat. Oh, not a fancy sailboat, but I've had a lot of fun. Not as much fun now that it's 40 degrees and rainy in Seattle, but over the summer it was fantastic. So been one of those things I've been wanting to do for a long time, and finally just sort of pulled the trigger on it.
So you keep your kids away from technology. I was thinking that you will be talking HoloLens and everything, and they will be wearing all the VR.
I wouldn't say we keep them away from technology.
But I've seen a trend, that a lot of people, they're trying to keep
Definitely careful about the screen time. Definitely, they have a couple of different robots that they can program using the iPad and stuff like that. So definitely using, and the older one is now starting to write reports, in school and stuff like that. So she's typing, she's doing research on Wikipedia and typing stuff up. So she's definitely using it, but I would say we definitely try and be a little careful about screen time and not use it as a way to avoid interacting with them. But use it, but still, digital world is part of everybody's life. You got to give it some time. You got to learn how to use it.
I see it from 5 years or 10 years from now. We'll all be using VR, the HoloLens or whatever it is. So we should expose a little bit, otherwise we will create the next breed of coal miners. So
actually, I love. Speaking of VR, I actually love. I travel around a bunch. We mentioned Shanghai and other places, and they don't get to go. But I take a lot of these photospheres, 3D, and they can actually. It's allowed them to sort of
be there.
Yeah, and I can come home and be like, and here's this place and that place, and so I totally see the value in it. And so it's good to get the exposure.
Yeah, I also have the 360 camera, so I when I walk, so you look like you're walking there when they put the gear on, and it has a lot of value there.
It's totally cool.
So awesome. Thanks for talking to me today.
Yeah, for sure.
And sorry we won't see you this year, but next year we'll see you again in the next conference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Take care. Great to see you.